The Democratic Alliance doesn't seem ready to file divorce papers with its partners in the Government of National Unity just yet, after this week's drama over the 2025 fiscal framework. So the DA has now instead gone to court to challenge the political process in Parliament, citing procedural inaccuracies and also the powers afforded to the Finance Minister under the VAT Act. At the same time, there are growing calls from some quarters in the ANC for President Cyril Ramaphosa to reshuffle his cabinet after even he also had strong words for their GNU partner in that leaked audio of a caucus meeting. And further afield, US President Donald Trump's affront on South Africa continues as we now contend with a 30% tariff on our goods. Perhaps there is some cold comfort in knowing that we're among 50 other African countries who've now suddenly been subjected to these measures. I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo and I'm coming to you from the sunny city of Cape Town for your latest edition of Your Week in Politics. On Tuesday, the Joint Select and Standing Committees on Finance were due to review the 2025 budget proposal tabled by Minister Enoch Godongwana. But the issue of a 0.5 percentage point VAT hike being included in the final report that would be presented in Parliament remained in contention. On Monday night, the DA and ANC held another virtual meeting in an attempt to find consensus, but nothing came out of it. Instead, the following morning, Luthuli House fired the first salvo, intimating that the end of the relationship within the Government of National Unity was on the horizon.
I don't know, Adrian, whether the DA will remain part of the GNU when Parliament has passed a budget that they do not support. I'm yet to see. I've never seen it anywhere in the world where a component of any kind of coalition or a Government of National Unity decide to stand very firm and oppose a budget and remain in government.
On that same morning, the Democratic Alliance postponed a scheduled media briefing and dug in its heels, drawing more red lines as they've done before. Will the DA leave the Government of National Unity?
They must try past that budget without the Democratic Alliance. We'll see.
What does that mean? Are you committing that you will leave the Government of National Unity should the ANC shop around for parties outside of the DA, which they claim they've already calculated and have gotten the numbers?
The Democratic Alliance will not sit and work with a budget that we do not believe serves the best interests of South Africans. So if push comes to shove and we find ourselves in a position where the GNU is unworkable altogether, where there is no sobriety as far as the direction we're supposed to take, then if we must, yes.
The Joint Finance Committee meeting was a marathon gathering of more than 8 hours where MPs debated the fiscal framework. It was there where Action SA put forward a proposal to pass the current report but include a recommendation that the National Treasury returns to Parliament within 30 days with revenue proposals on how to raise the money which would have been plugged by a VAT increase. The suggestion aims to ensure that the tax hike does not come into effect on the 1st of May as per the announcement by Godongwana in March.
So the proposed amendment is the fiscal framework tabled by the Minister of Finance is supported subject to the strict condition that National Treasury facilitates the receipts of substitute revenue proposals together with corresponding expenditure savings that will form the basis of an alternative revenue proposal instead of A, the proposed 0.5 percentage increase in value-added tax for the 25-26 financial year, effective 1 May 2025, in respect of which the committee has expressed serious concerns, and B, the failure to adjust personal income tax brackets in line with the higher of the actual CPI inflation for 2024 or the proposed CPI inflation for 2025.
Going into the meeting, the ANC had already calculated that it would be able to pass the financial report in the committee using its 4 votes with the assistance of Action SA's 1 vote and another singular vote of the IFP. But there was pushback from other political parties. The EFF questioned the law upon which Action SA's proposal was premised.
I think there's no legal framework that supports the proposal that is being made by Honorable Beasley and supported by some colleagues here. So I implore the committee to stick to the legal framework that guides us, which is the Money Bills Amendment procedure, and Other Related Matters Act, that we must either amend or accept the fiscal framework and revenue proposals. There's no legislative guidance that allows us to give windows for contemplation of other mechanisms to generate revenue while we accept the currently proposed fiscal framework and revenue proposals before us. It doesn't exist. So I think let's stick to the law, let's stick to what is before us.
By that evening, Action SA's proposal was adopted with the support of the ANC and IFP. The biggest test would now be on Wednesday when the House would put the report to a vote and whether the biggest party in the GNU would be able to do this without the DA. The ANC caucus also met to discuss possible scenarios, and in leaked audio of President Cyril Ramaphosa, it is clear that the relationship might have reached a point of no return.
This evening, John Steenhuisen made contact with me and said, "Where do we go now?" And I said, "John, the ball is entirely in your court." And he asked, "Does the ANC say we should leave the GNU?" I said, "The ball is in your court. You have put yourself in this position. So you need to work your way out. You took a decision in the committee. That was the choice you made. And you tried to argue that the position that was adopted is no different from the position that they had put up in either cabinet or outside." And I said, the reason why the ANC, through our chief whip, embarked on a process of consulting all parties, as we did when we formed the GNU, was to show leadership. We are the ones, whether you like it or not, who are leading this GNU. And we therefore have a responsibility to demonstrate that leadership. Even under difficult circumstances or situations, we will continue to do so. And that is why our chief whip and the various comrades of his other colleagues embark on this process of consulting with all parties. And I said to him, you as a party, of course, of the GNU, you were singular in saying you will oppose this budget, and you added insult upon insult towards the ANC and called the ANC all manner of names.
Wednesday's proceedings got off to a noisy start, with at least 45 minutes being spent by Speaker of Parliament Togo Didiza dealing with several points of order.
Speaker, on a point of order, House Honourable members, I have closed the debate on the point of order, whether the issue must be debated or not.
Once proceedings got underway, as various parties gave their inputs, it became clear that the DA's fellow coalition members were also hurtful with their conduct.
5 minutes before this hearing, I was the one running around saying to people, we can't lose the DA. We must convince the DA to remain. I'm standing here today to say, Abahambe.
I wish to caution the DA that if the DA think that their views are a master plan for all of us, they must wake up and think again. We are here to represent our constituency. We are here to represent the people of South Africa. We are not here to take mandate from the Democratic Alliance.
Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana also pulled no punches.
I don't think you can vote against a budget and tomorrow you want to go and be part of its implementation. It can't be. It can't be. We've got to draw a line on that point.
And when the matter was ultimately put to a vote, it came down to the wire with only a 12-vote difference in the House.
Honourable members, the outcome of the division is as follows. There were no abstentions, 182 voted against, and 194 voted in favour.
The adoption of the fiscal framework without the DA also meant that the threat of them leaving the GNU became even bigger. In its reaction, the Democratic Alliance said its federal executive would be meeting and deliberating on a way forward.
With the help of a lot of smaller parties like Action SA, the IFP, Musima Imanes Bossa, and certain other parties voted through this fiscal framework, and is going to enable the ANC to carry on with the mismanagement of our country's finances as they have been doing over the last 30 years.
The official opposition, Umkhonto weSizwe Party, as well as the EFF, have also taken aim with the procedure of the Standing Committee on Finance.
We are dealing here with a flawed process where we need to actually reflect in terms of what our rights in terms of dealing with this particular issue.
We are opposed to the budget because it was engaged in an illegal process. The committee did not do its proper job, and therefore we said to the Speaker, do not present this report before Parliament because it's flawed and it has not followed the necessary processes.
But the chairperson of that committee, Joe Maswanganyi, maintains that all processes were above board.
We followed all the prescript of the law in terms of the Money Bills and Related Matters Act. There's no provision of the Constitution, the rules and the Act that we violated. It's not the first time that we conducted this process.
But the future of the DA and the GNU not only rests with what they discuss as a party internally, but also the powers vested in President Ramaphosa and his prerogative to reshuffle his cabinet.
There will obviously be some reflection from all sides involved. We expect the DA to obviously reflect on its participation, or rather continued participation in the GNU. Having voted against the budget, they will have to reflect on how the ministers are going to drive programs using a budget that they voted against. So that's for them to reflect on. On the president's side, there will be a reflection in terms of how do we move forward from here onwards.
ANC National Chairperson Gwede Mantashe would not be drawn on whether as a party they would be putting pressure on Ramaphosa to make changes in his cabinet.
If the DA walks away, we're not pushing them. Once you say you're voting against a budget, but you have ministers who must get budget allocation, you are walking out of government.
The dust had barely settled on Wednesday evening when the Democratic Alliance announced it would be heading to the Western Cape High Court to file papers challenging the adoption of the 2025-26 fiscal framework. On Thursday morning, DA Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille filed an urgent interdict with two parts to their litigation.
Our plan B is very strong and solid. This morning I signed these papers. These are crucial papers that are going to really change the face of how these decisions are taken in Parliament and change the decision to increase your VAT. It will ensure that we prevent that. And these papers have two parts. The first is to get the process on the 1st of April that transpired in the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Finance declared null and void because they were unprocedural. Therefore, to set aside any decision they took. And the second part of Part A is to interdict a VAT increase on the 1st of May.
It's clear that the next 30 days will be critical, not only for the National Treasury, but also for the possible cementing of relationships between parties like the ANC and others that aren't part of the government of national unity. But it looks like there are already trust issues from Action SA after they lashed out at a statement from Luthuli House which failed to acknowledge their role in the passing of the fiscal framework. And for the DA, Action SA has this to say.
The DA spoke to nobody other than the ANC making their demands, their unreasonable demands. They overplayed their hand. They didn't engage us, fine. They didn't engage the IFP, GNU partner. They didn't engage RISE, GNU partner. Were they serious about finding a solution to this impasse? No. I believe they are propagating this impasse at their interest.
Coming up after the break, we turn our attention to the tariffs imposed on South Africa and at least 50 other African countries. We look at the implications of this as the International Relations and Trade and Industry departments held a joint briefing on our country's response to this. Plus, still on the tensions with the United States, former President Thabo Mbeki asks DIRCO critical questions about what its role should be in an unpredictable geopolitical landscape. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Thanks for staying tuned to Newzroom Africa on channel 405. Now, as the stability of our government of national unity was being analyzed following the budget vote, U.S. President Donald Trump added to the country's financial woes. He announced sweeping new tariffs as he proclaimed Liberation Day in the United States. For South Africa's part, exports to the U.S. will be a base rate of 30%. The South African government led briefings on Friday in an effort to manage the extreme concern over the economic impact of this move.
South Africa, 60%, 30%, and they've got some bad things going on in South Africa. You know, we're paying them billions of dollars, and we cut the funding because a lot of bad things are happening in South Africa. The fake news ought to be looking at it. They don't want to report it.
The tariff hike comes at a time when some U.S. lawmakers have called for a full review of the bilateral relationship between the two countries. Congressman Ronnie Jackson introduced a bill in the U.S. House of Representatives pushing for that reevaluation. Jackson says the proposal would also allow President Trump to impose sanctions on South African officials who support China, Russia, and Iran.
So market traders on Wall Street and investors all over the United States are voting with their feet. They are giving this move by President Trump the thumbs down. And we're in a situation here where President Trump, his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the loyalists within his administration who sat in the White House Rose Garden applauding his every syllable as he made this announcement, are the only people really here who argue that this is genuinely going to lead to what President Trump calls Boomtown USA. There are no serious-minded economists, certainly not a single Nobel Prize-winning economist, arguing that this is going to do anything other than create inflation, possibly stagflation in the United States, and prod the country down the road towards a recession, the prospect of an American recession now.
Good morning, colleagues.
On Friday, the International Relations and Trade, Industry and Competition departments held a joint briefing to outline how South Africa would respond to the tariffs announcement. Newzroom Africa's Ntokozo Khumalo attended that briefing in Midrand, Johannesburg.
U.S. President Donald Trump says it's time for foreign nations to pay for access to the U.S. market. He announced a baseline 10% tariff on imports to the United States, effective from the 5th of April. South Africa was hit with an additional 20% that Trump's administration calls a reciprocal tariff.
All of the foreign presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, ambassadors, and everyone else who will soon be calling to ask for exemptions from these tariffs, I say, terminate your own tariffs, drop your barriers, don't manipulate your currencies.
Despite there being very little room for negotiation, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Pax Dao says his department is embarking on an engagement strategy. His team engaged the U.S. Chamber of Commerce after he gave the keynote address at the Platinum Group Metals Industry Day.
We will be engaging with the understanding that one would want to ensure that we address reciprocal trade issues between us and the US. And yes, we have trade issues. We have a trade and investment facilitation agreement with the US that is due for renewal. We had started renegotiating the parameters of the TIFA last year.
South African industries to feel the greatest impacts include agriculture, specifically citrus, wine and the mining sector. According to SAPAC's director, a professional body for supply chain management, the 30% tariff on South African imports came as a surprise, and that it won't take long for industries, workers and consumers to feel the impact.
In the motor vehicle industry, automotive and in mining and in agriculture, we will start feeling it a little bit sooner, I think. Especially on the agricultural side, maybe where investment takes a longer turn, it's going to be a little bit longer. But I think as consumers, we will probably see within 3 to 6 months the effect of this.
Brazil, the UK, Turkey and Australia will be hit with a baseline tariff of 10% on all imports to the US effective 5 April. Others considered the worst offenders by Trump, including South Africa, Cambodia, China, Lesotho and Nigeria, will see higher tariffs.
COSATU's Matthew Parks says they're concerned about the impact this will have on our country's already staggering unemployment rate.
But it's going to be a very painful blow if it's implemented. I don't think any car manufacturer can compete with, as Michael said, a 30 plus 25%, a 55% tariff hike. How would you compete? I don't think our citrus farmers in the Western Cape can compete with a 30% tariff hike. Our clothing factories in Cape Town will struggle. So I think it's going to be a very painful blow, one we can't afford when you have a 1% economic growth rate for the past decade, or when we have a 41% unemployment rate. We can't afford this kind of a blow.
Staying with matters related to South Africa's relationship with the United States, former President Thabo Mbeki says transactional diplomacy being applied by the Trump administration should challenge our country and Africa as a whole to reflect more deeply about their role in an ever-changing world where power continues to shift. Mbeki was delivering the keynote address at the inaugural Aziz Bahad Peace, Security and Human Rights Annual Lecture at the OR Tambo building in Tshwane on Monday morning. Mbeki says the task of reshaping how South Africa interacts with countries like the United States will not be easy, but has to consider various factors. This includes how diplomacy has become increasingly transactional under Trump, debates around whether the US is still the world's economic superpower, and if this is no longer the case, where does this place our country and the rest of the African continent?
Does DIRCO understand the world in which it engages international relations for the people of South Africa? Does it have the internal capacity to develop this understanding? And in practice, what is done practically to get this understanding?
In remembering Aziz Bahad, Mbeki recalls the role he played in trying to thwart conflicts such as the invasion of Iraq in 2003 by the US, after forming part of a team that met with Saddam Hussein to confirm whether indeed there were weapons of mass destruction in that country. At the time, Bahad confirmed that no such artillery existed and relayed this message to the UN Security Council in an effort to de-escalate an already tense relationship. Mbeki says Bahad would have been shocked by Trump's executive orders against our nation, especially since he spent most of his diplomatic life seeking to explain South Africa's transformative policies after apartheid.
The emerging global order places our continent in a better position to address its many challenges of the eradication of poverty and underdevelopment, of silencing the guns, of ensuring that the people govern and ending Africa's international marginalization. The serious challenge in this regard is that there is no evidence or sign anywhere that Africa's political and intellectual leadership is not only conscious of the need to define our continent's place in the emerging multipolar world, but is ready to act on this urgent matter. Given his performance, recent performance with regard to many of Africa's contemporary challenges, it is very, very doubtful that the continental body, the African Union, would be up to this task.
On the continued fragmentation of the global political and economic system, ongoing conflicts in Africa, the Middle East and the rest of the world, Pahad's wife says her husband would have told us that these are not unforeseen events. On the contrary, the signs were always there, and now humanity faces unprecedented uncertainty.
He warned us about the growing threats to regional and international peace and security, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the growth of populist political and economic nationalism and anti-democratic tendencies, the disregard of international law with impunity, the fundamental weakening of multilateral institutions, and the growing influence of the military-industrial complex.
The International Relations Minister says it's intellectually dishonest for some parties within the Government of National Unity to pretend that the government didn't inherit two countries where the one was white and prosperous and the other black and stratified along tribal lines without any economic agenda.
It is therefore shocking that the DA will argue that we are just implementing ANC policy in foreign affairs, when they have agreed to the above in the statement of intent, and it is what we continue to implement. The Government of National Unity does not supersede the Constitution. The statement of intent itself commits itself to constitutionalism. It can't be that when we implement what is in the Constitution, in the Foreign Services Act, National Interest Document, and the National Development Plan, we are served to be acting unilaterally.
That's a wrap from me this week. Stay tuned to Newzroom Afrika for more political stories in the coming days. On Sunday, the ANC National Working Committee will be meeting to discuss its way forward. And then the next day, a special executive committee gathering is expected to take place, with a large grouping already baying for the DA's blue blood to be kicked out of the Government of National Unity. Undoubtedly, we also expect an update from John Steenhuisen and his party after the Federal Executive Committee met to chart the way forward. You know where to catch all those updates, but for now it's goodbye. Thank you for watching.